James watched with growing unease as Storm, their usually gentle German shepherd, once again positioned himself beside the baby's crib. Evening had settled over their modest home, casting long shadows across the nursery, and like clockwork, the same pattern played out, just as it had every night for the past 2 weeks. Storm's ears tilted sharply forward. His posture stiffened. A low, steady growl rumbled from his chest. "I still can't make sense of it," James murmured to his wife, Margaret, who stood quietly in the doorway, arms folded, brow furrowed. Storm had been part of their lives for 5 years, ever since they adopted him from the shelter. He was calm, loyal, and unfailingly gentle, especially around children. The neighborhood kids loved him, often stopping during walks to give him a quick pat or toss him a treat. He'd always wag his tail in greeting. When they brought baby Oliver home 3 months ago, Storm's demeanor had remained unchanged, watchful but loving. He'd lie beside the crib during nap time, tail flicking lightly whenever Oliver stirred. But something had shifted. 2 weeks ago, he began standing guard every night, growling at the same corner of the room. Spring evenings were warming up, and James had inspected the nursery repeatedly. The windows were shut tight, the screens unbroken, and there were no signs of pests or intruders. Still, Storm's eyes stayed locked on that same spot, even when Oliver slept soundly. Margaret had suggested a visit to the vet, thinking maybe Storm was in pain or anxious, but his checkup had revealed nothing. He was in excellent health. The vet mentioned that dogs sometimes detect things humans can't: subtle noises, changes in pressure, vibrations. James had spent hours observing the dog, taking note of his behavior. The growling wasn't hostile, it was protective. Storm didn't snarl or bare his teeth. He simply stood his ground, always between Oliver and that corner, like a sentinel shielding something precious. "Maybe we should have someone check the house," Margaret said one evening, concern soft in her voice. "Remember last fall? He wouldn't stop scratching at the kitchen wall. Turned out there was a leaking pipe." She had a point. Storm's instincts had been right before. The following day, James noticed something he hadn't before. While changing Oliver's diaper, he felt a faint draft coming from the very corner Storm always fixated on. Barely there, but just enough to make the mobile above the crib spin gently. Could that be it? A barely perceptible draft? Dogs could pick up on air movement, sounds, or even sense that humans couldn't. That night, as Storm resumed his post by the crib, James made up his mind. First thing in the morning, he'd call for a full home inspection. Something wasn't right, and if Storm was trying to warn them, they needed to listen. He reached down to stroke Storm's head. The dog's tail gave a slow wag, but his eyes didn't move from the corner. "Good boy," James whispered, "loyal, steadfast." Whatever was going on, they would figure it out, for Oliver's safety and for Storm's peace of mind. The mystery wouldn't remain unsolved much longer. But for now, James took comfort in knowing their son was being watched over with unwavering devotion. Dogs had always been known to sense what people could not, and Storm had never steered them wrong. The next morning, James made the call as soon as the home inspection office opened. The earliest available slot was 3 days away, a frustrating wait, given the circumstances. Margaret suggested moving Oliver's crib into their bedroom for the time being, but James hesitated. What if doing so only masked the real issue? Throughout the day, he paid closer attention to Storm's rhythm. In the morning, the dog was calm, relaxed. He even dozed in a sunbeam near the window. But as the day wore on, something shifted. By 4 p.m., Storm began pacing between the door and that same corner, nervous energy building as dusk approached. Working from home that day, James set up shop at the desk near the nursery, jotting notes about the dog's behavior. The draft seemed to fluctuate, stronger in the late afternoon, especially when the sun warmed the outer wall. Being an older house, it might have structural quirks that reacted to the temperature. That evening, Margaret returned from work with her usual tote bag and a notebook filled with questions for the inspector. She'd also spoken with their elderly neighbor, also named Margaret, who'd lived next door for 4 decades. She mentioned noticing water stains on the wall that backed onto Oliver's nursery after the last major storm. Later that night, as Storm resumed his watch, James brought a stepladder into the room. Storm didn't move but followed his every motion with alert eyes. With a flashlight, James examined the upper corner. There, Faint hairline cracks spiderwebbed out from the paint. He pressed a palm to the wall. A slight vibration hummed against his skin, subtle but real. Oliver slept through it all, peaceful and still. The mobile spun lazily in the faint draft, casting slow-moving shadows along the walls. Storm's eyes tracked those shadows, but his focus always returned to that corner. His growl deepened whenever the vibrations pulsed slightly stronger. Margaret sat nearby, tablet in hand, quietly researching possibilities. "It could be anything," she said softly. "Plumbing, structural settling, maybe even wiring. But what gets me is, it only happens at night. Something must shift as the house cools." They agreed to take shifts staying awake. During James's turn, just after midnight, the draft intensified. Along with it came a sound, soft, not quite a whistle, more like a faint whoosh, as if air were rushing through a narrow space behind the wall. Storm's ears twitched. His growl remained steady. James lifted Oliver from the crib, holding him close as he walked the room. Storm stood and moved with them, always placing himself between them and that corner. Not aggressive, just alert, protective. After settling Oliver back down, James found himself overcome with gratitude. For Storm, for his loyalty, for his instincts. Whatever was happening, James trusted Storm to help guide them through it. The home inspector couldn't come soon enough, but until then, Storm would be on guard. Always. That night, as James finally crawled into bed, leaving Storm at his self-appointed post, he felt a quiet certainty building inside him. They were on the brink of uncovering something important. Sometimes, it took a dog's instincts to see what human eyes never could. Thursday morning came at last. The home inspector arrived promptly, stepping into the nursery with a clipboard in hand, and immediately noticed Storm's tense, watchful posture. "Dogs are often better than any tool we've got," the inspector remarked, setting his equipment bag on the floor with a soft thud. "They pick up on things our instruments might completely miss, like water running inside a wall, or wood straining under stress." James recounted Storm's nightly behavior as Margaret cradled Oliver nearby. The inspector listened intently, nodding as he moved through the room. He started with the basics, checking the walls for alignment and the floor for evenness. But when he reached the corner that had been haunting Storm, the level revealed a slight but distinct tilt. "Well, that's interesting," he murmured, pressing a palm against the wall. He retrieved a moisture meter, ran it along the surface, and the reading spiked sharply. "There's definitely high moisture here," he confirmed. "And look at this." He angled his flashlight toward the baseboards. A faint, darkened line was barely visible, subtle enough to miss on a casual glance, but unmistakable under scrutiny. Storm remained close throughout the inspection, his gaze locked on the corner. When the inspector tapped the wall, the dog's ears snapped forward, and a soft whine escaped him. It wasn't the usual low growl they'd come to expect. It was sharper, more urgent, as if to say, finally, someone else sees it too. The inspection continued with slow, methodical precision, each step peeling back another layer of concern. Brief interruption. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us more than you know. Thanks so much. The inspector eventually identified extensive water damage along the exterior brickwork. A failing gutter system was the likely source. Rainwater hadn't been draining properly, and had instead seeped into the wall cavity, silently weakening the structure. "The vibrations you noticed," he said, "are probably caused by water moving through compromised materials, like loosened bricks or aging timber. The problem," he explained, "had likely been building for quite a while. Immediate repairs were essential to prevent a larger disaster." "This spring's been unusually wet," the inspector continued. "During the day, sunlight heats the wall, evaporating moisture and drawing it upward. But when the temperature drops at night, it condenses and flows downward again. That cycle creates subtle shifts, ones your dog can hear or feel, much earlier than we can." Margaret tightened her arms around Oliver, a mix of relief and unease passing over her face. At least now they had answers, but they weren't small ones. The inspector continued his sweep, taking photos and filling pages with notes. Down in the crawl space, he found the same troubling signs. Moisture creeping into the foundation, threatening the very bones of the house. If this had gone unnoticed even a few more months, he warned, You could have been facing serious structural failure. Your dog may have just saved you from a dangerous collapse. James reached down and patted Storm's head. The shepherd, though still alert, had relaxed a bit, as if reassured that someone had finally validated his concern. The inspector outlined a detailed repair plan and handed them a list of trusted contractors who could address both the external drainage issues and the internal damage. His tone was serious but hopeful. Could be fixed. They just had to act quickly. That evening, as they reviewed estimates and scheduled repair appointments, Storm once again positioned himself beside Oliver's crib. But his posture was different, less tense. The growl that had become a nightly fixture was softer now, almost thoughtful, like he understood that help was on the way. Following the inspector's advice, James and Margaret moved the crib into their bedroom. Storm trailed them during the transition, casting one last glance at the nursery's corner before curling up on his bed beside theirs. James watched him settle in with deep appreciation. Storm had sensed the problem long before they could have, and in doing so, he may have averted something far worse. The contractor team arrived the following week. What they uncovered made James's chest tighten. Once the wall was opened up, the full extent of the damage was revealed. The wooden support beam buried deep in the corner had rotted almost entirely through. Black mold clung to sections of the cavity, thriving in the dampness. The contractor shook his head as he examined the damage. "This isn't just water," he said grimly. "That beam was close to failure. It wouldn't have taken much. A shift in weather, added weight, anything could have given out without warning." James glanced over at Storm, who sat watching from the hallway, ears perked, tail resting still. Night after night, Storm had stood guard against something he couldn't explain, only feel, something no one else could see. Margaret took leave from work to oversee the repairs. As the days passed, she noticed how Storm's behavior shifted again. He no longer growled in the evenings. Instead, he followed the contractors around, tail wagging slowly as they worked. His tension had lifted, but he never stopped keeping an eye on things. The work quickly grew fond of him, even joking that Storm was their site supervisor, especially when he'd perk up whenever someone stepped near the now exposed corner. Their veterinarian stopped by to check in on Storm and offered further insight. "He wasn't just reacting to noise," she explained. "Dogs like Storm can detect low-frequency vibrations and even chemical changes in the air. Instability in a structure, like a failing beam, can give off all kinds of tiny signals. To him, it was probably like a ticking clock." Meanwhile, word of their situation spread. Neighbors started booking inspections of their own. Margaret, next door, discovered the early signs of moisture in her own home, catching it in time thanks to their story. The contractor later confirmed that the area's recent stormy weather had taken a toll on many of the older homes nearby. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and golden light filtered through the plastic covering in the nursery, James noticed something different. Storm was lying peacefully on his bed. No growling, no fixed stare, just a calm gaze watching the workers clean up for the day. James exhaled, long and quiet. Storm knew the worst was over. The repairs took 2 full weeks to complete. During that time, Oliver stayed in their room. Storm adapted easily, though he still wandered into the nursery each day, inspecting the progress with a quiet intensity, as if ensuring the work met his unspoken standards. The crew didn't mind. In fact, they joked that Storm was the best quality control inspector they'd ever worked with. James began sharing their story with other parents at the park, often while Storm gently played with Oliver on the picnic blanket. "Animals pick up on things we don't," he would explain. "What we see as strange behavior might be their way of trying to tell us something important. We just have to pay attention." Word of their experience spread throughout the community. The local veterinary clinic even invited James to speak at a pet owner's workshop, using Storm's story as a real-life example of how pets often detect household dangers long before humans do. Margaret put together a simple but powerful presentation, complete with photos of the water damage, the rotted beam, and Storm standing guard night after night. Their goal was clear: help other families understand that when an animal is trying to say something, it's worth listening. As the final days of repairs wrapped up, James found himself reflecting on how close they had come to disaster. If Storm hadn't been so persistent, if they dismissed his behavior as mere restlessness or jealousy, they might have missed the warning signs entirely. The contractor reassured them that everything had been addressed. The failing gutter system was replaced, Waterproofing had been reinforced, and the new structural beam was rock solid. They could move forward with peace of mind. Storm, of course, was celebrated. Treats, belly rubs, and constant praise followed him everywhere. But true to his nature, his greatest satisfaction seemed to come from quietly watching over Oliver. No fanfare needed. The growling had stopped completely. In its place were long, quiet naps near the once troubled wall. James often caught himself lingering in the nursery doorway, moved by the quiet bond between his son and their silent guardian. Finally, the day arrived to return Oliver's crib to its rightful place. The nursery looked nearly identical to how it had before, but it felt different. The soft yellow walls were freshly painted, the window frames sealed, the draft long gone. New baseboards ran neatly along the floor, and behind them, hidden from view, the structure was stronger than it had ever been. James and Margaret stood together, watching as Storm entered the room ahead of them. He made his usual circuit, nose to the floor, pausing in the corner that had once drawn so much of his concern. Then, satisfied, he let out a soft huff and flopped down by the window, settling into his old spot without a single growl or whine. That one small gesture said more than words ever could. That evening, they laid Oliver in his crib for the first time in weeks. The mobile above him turned gently, not from a draft, but from the soft movement of air in a peaceful room. The silence felt calm, not tense, secure. Storm lay nearby, head resting on his paws, watching with half-lidded eyes. Occasionally he'd lift his head, just enough to check on Oliver, then settle back into sleep.
No anxiety.
No warning growls, just peace. Did you enjoy the story? What do you think about the bond between dogs and children? Is it truly as powerful as it seems? Or do you think it's too risky to leave them alone together? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If the story moved you, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Stories like this remind us that love, whether it comes from a parent, a pet, or a silent guardian, can sometimes be the thing that saves us. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you in the next video. Take care, and give your pets a little extra love today.